My name is Tom Wiedemann, and I'm the Executive Director at the Research Center, and I want to welcome you all to today's wonderful presentation. A couple of announcements that'll occupy some more time while we work on sound up front. As I'm sure you all know, the Center is a non-for-profit organization, and we rely on contributions to support not only the programs there, but also to support the Center conversations and the reception that we're all going to enjoy after. And so to help us defray some of those costs, we'd like to suggest a $5 per person contribution to cover today's costs. There's a small container inside the door as you go back over, purely voluntary. But if you have a mind to, we'd appreciate your support. Our next Center conversation on June 24th will celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Canadian Grand Prix. And the featured speaker will be George Webster, who was the race steward for the Grand Prix for several years, as well as a motorsports journalist. Joining George will be Lionel Birnbaum, a motorsports photographer who shot many of the races for many, many years, and Tim Meadow, who was a corner worker for many years at the Grand Prix. That's next month, June 24th. When you return, this is this is an unusual, but when you go back over to the center, please look for a birthday card that we'd like to ask you to sign. Next Friday is Otto Linton's 100th birthday, and he is the last of the 1948 drivers. So please help us warm his 100th birthday by signing the birthday card that we've got for him over in the lobby. We're very honored that Mario Andretti will be our awardee at the Cameron Argetsinger Award Dinner this year, held on August 31st. We have a few, and I mean a very few, tickets left for that event. So if you're interested, please inquire when you go back over to the center. In terms of today's event, there are several special thank yous that I'd like to extend. First of all, I want to call your attention to the wonderful exhibits that are on display over in the center on John Fitch. Our archivist, Jenny Ambrose, has been working very hard pulling out materials from our collection of John, and it's really an amazing exhibit. So thank you. Thanks, Jenny. And special thanks to Jesse Alexander, our eminent motorsports photographer who donated 5 portraits of John Fitch. The fabulous Fitch Phoenix, say that 3 times fast, fabulous Fitch Phoenix, is on display over in our lobby, and that was loaned to us by Charles Mallory. The 1965 Corvair Sprint that you see parked outside is brought to us by our very own Tim Meadow. I understand there are a number of Corvairs out there in the parking lot now, so thank you all for bringing those along. Today marks the initiation of a very special fundraising event. The Research Center is spearheading efforts to purchase and install a gravestone marker on the grave of Elizabeth and John Fitch. They are currently lying in an unmarked grave in Lime Rock, and we intend to work with the Fitch family to see that a suitable memorial is placed in time for what would have been John's 100th birthday, which is coming up on August 4th. We're estimating that the total cost is going to be somewhere around $4,000. So contributions to help fix this can be made to the IMRRC, which makes them tax deductible. And if you are of a mind to help us raise funds for that memorial, please note on your correspondence or your check the Fitch Memorial, so we're sure to dedicate it appropriately. As a special thank you to the first 10 people willing to pledge or contribute $100, we have, courtesy of Bob Sirna, thank you, Bob, we have 10 photographs signed by John. And we're offering these as a thank you to the first 10 individuals, we have a very limited number of them, who are willing to help us out with $100 or more contribution. We are particularly excited with our panel this afternoon. It's coming, guys. Our first panelist has been working with the Research Center for several years, assisting in procuring for us the bulk of the John Fitch collection, as well as putting together the rest of his panelists. Larry Berman has spent a great deal of time with John as house guest, as archivist, and as motorsports historian. The two met in the late 1980s in Lime Rock. At the 1998 Watkins Glen Vintage Grand Prix Festival, Larry rode in the pace car with John and Phil Walters. And he was with him at the Sebring 50th in 2002 and in Pebble Beach that same year for the Mercedes event where Larry introduced John to Jay Leno. He celebrated John's 95th birthday with him, and later that year celebrated his life. Joining Larry is Bob Sirna, called by Larry an FOF, a friend of Fitch. Bob first met John in 1998 when he invited John to visit his race fabrication shop, where Bob was building a recreation of the 1982 1952 W194 300 SL. Did I get that right? I got that right. Open factory race car. Bob's plan was to present it as the number 6 Mercedes Factory Works Carrera Pan America race, and it's the car that John drove in Mexico. Together, they traveled the world for the next 11 years and spent many hours together towing race cars around the country. And our third panelist is Carl Goodwin. Carl worked with John Fitch for 18 years at Impact Attenuation, promoting the Fitch energy-absorbing safety barriers for racing. Carl writes for 5 magazines, including Vintage Sports and Vintage Race Car, and for one book publishing company, McFarland. He has written 6 articles on John and contributed to 3 books. Along with Larry Berman, he will be writing the John Fitch chapter in the forthcoming book on Lime Rock. He has earned the Carl Benz Award from the Society of Automotive Historians 4 times and has won numerous golds, silvers, bronzes presented by the International Automotive Media Awards. And he's traveled to us, speaking of out of state, from his home in Novelty, Ohio. So, ladies and gentlemen, through the rain. Through the rain. Well, so did they. But just before we get started, I'm going to ask Larry for some help here. We're going to ask Larry to select the winning ticket. We have 3 tickets to this year's Indianapolis 500 that have been donated to us by the Reverend Michael and Susan Hartney in memory of their son, Michael Jack Hartney, a 20-time attender. Father, a 20-time attender of the Indy 500. So, I'm going to dig deep. Not that one. That's mine. And the winner is Christopher Locke from San Francisco.
Like that. Not in attendance.
So he's probably, Christopher, no, we didn't have anyone from California.
You bought the first ticket, too.
The very first ticket was bought by Christopher Locke. So now, I'll get out of the way. The light is going to...
I need the ticket.
Yes. The light is going to switch back over to blind our panelists. Ladies and gentlemen, our distinguished panelists, the exciting life of John Fitch.
So we'd like to thank all of you for being here, and please excuse my voice because I've had a sore throat since Monday, and hopefully it'll come through clearly. We're here to share with you the interesting and exciting life of John Fitch. He was a very important, underrated, and much accomplished man. I had the pleasure of meeting him many years ago, spending many nights and weekends as a house guest of the Fitches, their home in Lime Rock, Connecticut, and he was just an amazing individual. We'll go through the PowerPoint, and the 3 of us are going to take turns commenting. John started out at a young age becoming interested in automobiles. This was a vehicle that he put together by taking junk parts. He was born in Indianapolis, which is interesting because of the raceway. He was a student at Kentucky Military Academy. He studied civil engineering at Lehigh University. You know, and he did many, many interesting things. In World War II, he started out as an A-20 light bomber pilot in North Africa, bombing the supply routes to Rommel's tank forces. He then came back and went to school to become a P-51 Mustang pilot.
May I add one little thing? The German jets, he was the first pilot to shoot down a German jet. They had a raid on a base where all of these were massed, and the U.S. forces killed every one of them. And they had a 100-mile-an-hour speed differential on the P-51, so they had to get rid of those planes.
Well, not only that, but he got it while it was coming off the runway. It was only about 150 feet in the air, and he would not have been able to shoot it down had it gained altitude and speed. One other comment, John, before the war, to stay in chronological sequence, he tried to enlist in the British Air Force. I went to Britain. He learned how to fly earlier. I can't remember the exact details. And they said, well, we got too many people and not enough planes. Go home, John. So John spent the 39, 40, before the U.S. got into the war, he spent some time in the Caribbean and in the Gulf of Mexico on a sailboat looking for German submarines, which there were some in there.
At
Did you
one,
know that, Larry?
yes, sir. At one point, John was at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio as a captain in the Air Force, and they were testing cannons by firing over Lake Erie, and he was very bored. So one night, he happened to be at the officers' club, and the story that he tells is he was in the men's room, and he was complaining about the fact that he couldn't stand doing this duty. Out of one of the stalls comes the commanding officer of the base. He looks at Captain Fitch and says, report to me at my office at 0800 hours tomorrow morning. Man washed his hands and left. Fitch turns to his friend and thought he was going to be court-martialed. Gets there the next morning. He has orders for flight school so that he could learn to become a P-51 Mustang pilot. At some point in February of 1945, he and his wing group were strafing supply trains over Germany. They went in once, the flak came up. They pulled out. They went in twice. And he said afterwards, I knew we shouldn't have done the third time because that's when he got nailed. And he was shot down, taken POW, was in the same POW camp as General Patton's son-in-law. That was the first camp that was liberated because Patton's daughter wanted her husband home. It was part of John Fitch's charmed life.
That time. Well, John told me when we were in the car one day driving out west towards Monterey that when he got out of his parachute, when he landed after being shot down, the city fathers, the city townspeople took him into town and put him in front of the mayor, and he explained to that mayor that the war was almost over, and that if they treated this young American flyer nicely, very nice, he would make sure that they were treated nice after the war. And the townspeople really did believe that.
One more thing. They had a radio club at this prison, and that meant that each person had a different part of the radio, and they would meet in a secret place and listen to the troop movements to see how close they were to that prison. And finally, Patton came in, he rolled the tanks over the gates of the prison and shot all the guards in the towers, and that was about it for them.
I didn't know that either.
There are a lot of wonderful John Fitch stories. This photo shows Rose Kennedy, the president's mother, fishing with John Fitch off of Palm Beach, Florida, because John spent some time after the war in Palm Beach, and they went fishing because he was dating one of the Kennedy daughters, Kathleen.
In fact, they probably would have gotten married, but Kathleen was killed in an airplane crash. She had been married to the British aviator that was killed in World War II. And John was a frequent guest at the Kennedy compound in Hyannisport and in Palm Beach. He and Jack Kennedy, before he ever ran for office, were carousing around all over the United States with 3 or 4 other naval and or war veterans. And he was at dinner at the Kennedy compound in Palm Beach when Jack Kennedy announced to his family that he was going to run for Senate. Now, I asked John, this is face-to-face, first-person statement, John, what did you think? Did you vote for Jack? He says, I couldn't vote for him. I caroused around with him. I knew exactly what kind of a rogue he was.
One more thing. Right after the war, John went to Dayton, Ohio, at the air base there with a friend, and his friend said, "Do you mind if I run a few errands? You can tag along." I said, "Sure, that's fine." He goes to this house there, and he opens the door, goes into the house, and there is a man playing a ball with a little child. He's got a business suit on, and the man says, "John, I would like you to meet Orville Wright."
That's true.
And you think of how far we've come. Fabric wings, and now a jetliner. It's incredible.
Yep.
Just to finish out World War II, John received a presidential citation, theater awards for being in North Africa and Europe, air medals. He was wounded, so he received a Purple Heart, POW medal, and many other honors, but he was very humble about all of these. Now we're going to start him off racing, and that the woman with him is Elizabeth Huntley, who became Mrs. Fitch. He started racing at Watkins Glen in 1948 in an MGTC, which you can see in the photo. He raced here in 49 in a TC, came 5th in the Grand Prix, 6th overall in the Seneca Cup. And we should have him going to, there he is at Watkins Glen. He's in Palm Beach Shores, which is north of Palm Beach. There was a developer that had land, and Briggs Cunningham and his friends convinced the developer that they could run a sports car race on the streets in the development before the homes were built. So the car on the left is a car that John created called the Fitch Model B. It also had another nickname, which some of you may recall.
You mean the Fitch bitch?
Yes, and it had a Fiat engine in it. This is 1951 when John borrowed Tom Cole's Allard that you see in the photo. John tells the story that the frame was bent in a racing accident. He had to use a chain around a tree to straighten the frame in order to run that car in Argentina. And he won. He won the Argentina Grand Prix. The trophy photoed on the left is a huge trophy. He says that he gave it to someone to ship back to the States because he couldn't take it on the plane, and it was lost or stolen. I took that photo. I don't have the year, but it was probably 15 or 20 years ago when a man brought it to the Lars Anderson Auto Museum in Brookline, Mass. And the man lives in Worcester, Mass. I asked him where he got it, and he said he bought it somewhere. It was stolen property. And I should have tried to retrieve it for John. John loves to tell the story about receiving the trophy after he won the Argentine Grand Prix, and he was given the trophy by Eva Perón and Juan Perón. And Eva gave him a kiss along with the trophy. And he says, somehow, shortly thereafter, she passed away. He was wondering what was in that kiss.
May I say one little... Also, he was given a free membership in the Peronist Party. Well, down in South America, that's pretty close to the Nazi Party. It's kind of odd with a patriotic American like John getting that, but he didn't have any say in it.
In the photos that are up now are the Fitch Whittemore special, which was Jaguar XK120 based, rebodied with an aluminum body that was designed by his friend Kobe Whitmore. Kobe was a graphic designer, and they were very close friends. On the right side, you see John driving the car at Bridgehampton on the road races, where he finished first in class. This is a great photo of John in Mexico driving for the Kiefer team. His car number was 32, and it was Tony Bettenhauser that drove the number 7 car that won the race. John didn't finish. He got through the first section driving a Chrysler Saratoga that was modified like the number 7 car by Kiefer. Kiefer's claim to fame, you may know, is that he owned and created Mercury Outboard Motor Company after he left work at Evinrude, decided to do his own thing, and he fielded cars in 51, 52, and 53 in Mexico. Here's the certificate that John Cooper Fitch was awarded in 51. Now he goes to Le Mans to drive for a man who became one of his closest friends, and that is Briggs Cunningham. And he's driving here in the C2R, in one of the C2R cars in France. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a better photo than this one. But that started a long-standing relationship where John drove many races for Briggs all over. Here he is in one of the real C4R cars. One of them is owned by Dr. Fred Simeone, and it's in his foundation museum in Philadelphia. And the other is owned by Miles Collier, and it's in his collection in Naples, Florida. The Revs Institute or Collier collection. And here we are in Watkins Glen, of course, where John is driving in the race. And if you notice the Atlantic sign, that was Atlantic Richfield, which doesn't exist. All those buildings have been removed recently to create the new town parking lot. And here's the accident. Here's the accident where the number 8 car came close to the crowd. The door opened and hit, I believe it was an 8 or 9-year-old little boy, and killed him. And that's what ended racing on the streets in Watkins Glen in the United States. It all stopped. And then everybody had to scramble to find purpose-built racetracks in 53, 52. They went to the Air Force. It was General Curtis LeMay, if I recall, who the SCCA made a deal with, and they raced on Air Force bases for about 3 years until 55.
General LeMay basically formed a bridge between the old road racing courses and the new purpose-built courses, and he kept the momentum of sports car racing. And these races were at all the SAC bases, and they served a charitable purpose in that the admissions charged to get into the race were all given to the Servicemen's Entertainment Fund, because they had a problem with retaining people who were trained. They'd leave the service because they just didn't like it well enough, and this helped to retain many of those experts.
This is a wonderful recent poster. I happen to have this framed and signed by John at home in my library, but I like the colors because it's very graphic. Okay.
Can I make a comment?
We will let Mr.
All right.
Sirna
Let me lead up to this. Back in 1951, when John was in Europe, the German racing team, Neubauer, was going to be setting up a 52 race season, and John's exploits at Le Mans with Cunningham brought him to their attention. they asked John in early '52 to test at the Nuremberg ring, and he tested for Nuremberg, and I think he drove a Porsche. He had driven a Porsche in a race about a week earlier, if I remember correctly, but he tested one of the 52 race cars, that Mercedes W194s, and his times were either equal or better or so close to the race team, top team, Mercedes team works drivers, that they were very impressed. So they invited John, when they decided to run in the Carrera, they invited John to race as their third car driver, team driver, or team car. He has told me that he believes that he was instrumental, in his opinion, in getting Mercedes to come to this race. Now, that's an opinion of John Fitch. Whether it's true or not, none of us will ever know, because everybody else is dead, almost. But nevertheless, they did decide to run. They contacted John and invited him, and you see him sitting in this car.
As you probably know, there were two coupes, two 300 SL coupes, and one roadster. John and his co-driver they qualified fourth overall. They were disqualified after 230 miles because of inappropriate working on the car to do some repairs. The side story to this car is, and Bob Sirna can correct me, it was taken apart after the race when it was taken back to Germany. It was dismantled and the parts were used for other projects. That didn't stop my compatriot, Mr. Sirna, from obtaining copies of the drawings of the car. And in 1990,
Well, the project was started in California by a different restoration shop and owner, and they had Studebaker Packard, executive retiree, had a complete set of drawings, body, frame, everything. They started building this 52 car. I saw it in 1993 or 4 at one of the Goldwyn Group conventions in California. I was instantly in love. It's like I saw Marilyn Monroe. Could think of nothing else but this car. The project languid, got stopped. The guys wouldn't pay any more money. There was a lot of money in this. It was only a fourth done. I traded a finished show Gullwing for the incomplete project. At that time, I didn't realize what I had, but it had engine number M21, which had been in the Le Mans winning car. Nevertheless, I invited John in the late 1990s to come to Michigan and sit in what I was making, and he fell in love with it too. But I'll turn this back over to Larry.
Bob did finish the car to make a duplicate, an absolute dead-on duplicate of the original car. He and John traveled with the car. They went to Goodwood. They went to the Mille Amelia. They were in California. So they had a lot of fun. Getting back on track, here's John in Sebring in 1953, driving, of course, a C4R Cunningham. The only time that I know that he was at Indianapolis was in 1953 when he tested, but never drove. This is the prelude to a major league accident that he was involved with.
53?
In 53 at Reims. First he was at Le Mans, then at Reims. The car flipped end over end something like 5 times, and he walked away from it. The man in the black jacket is Phil Walters, who is his close friend and occasional co-driver on the Cunningham team.
May I say just one over? I was talking with Phil Walters about that accident, and but we were also talking about sailboat keels and how you have to have a parabolic leading edge to give you some lift. Well, this had a parabolic nose, and that's what lifted it up, and that's what created the blowover. We finally concluded 40 years later.
They really did not understand aerodynamics back then. Many of the cars would lift, and it was not uncommon to lose control if things weren't going right aerodynamically.
Just as a little follow-up, John Fitch, out of approximately 140 races that I've cataloged in his race history, 64 of them were for Briggs Cunningham, who was his very close friend, and he had the highest regard for Mr. Cunningham and the way he ran a race team. This was on the occasion of the Alpine Rally, and you can see the snow. He was driving a Sunbeam Talbot. And if you know much about John Fitch, he drove a variety of cars, and he had a great time. Didn't matter whose car, as long as they gave it to him, he'd be there. This is one of the very few, it's the only photograph that we could find anywhere in the world of John in number 16, and this is a Chrysler New Yorker, not a Saratoga. In '51, he drove a Saratoga, which was a two-door, smaller car. This, again, was a Hemi-powered Chrysler, and this was a New Yorker.
Four-door?
I believe it was a four-door. Chuck? I think it's two-door. Two-door. Chuck would know. He's the expert on Hemis in the crowd. Right, and this car was painted in blue and orange, which were the colors of the University of Florida, where Carl Kiekhaefer's daughter attended school. And there's John with a 300 SL Gullwing. As you could tell, he was a pretty handsome guy. When he and his wife, Elizabeth, were married, he was wearing a white suit and she was wearing a white dress. And he looked like he just came out of Gentleman's Quarterly. And they were married at the chapel at Union College in Schenectady, New York, because her brother was a professor there, and they were able to use the chapel for their wedding.
Let me talk about this a little bit. This picture's a bit deceiving. This is not his race car. His race car did not have a front bumper. This is a gussied up PR car that he's sitting in. And I know that, in fact. Now, John drove a very customized 300 SL Gullwing that was factory prepared. But it's amazing. It was his best, I think, in my humble opinion, his best race of his career. He came in 5th overall, beaten only by the two Works Mercedes SLRs of Fangio and Moss, one Maserati and one Ferrari. 5th overall in the race car version of this car in a 1,000-mile race. It was his best race.
It was about 11 hours.
Yeah.
11 hours for 1,000 miles.
And his co-driver was a German newspaper man, a writer, who was almost sick most of the race, had never ridden in a real race before, and was scared out of his wits, according to what John told me. John would say, just close your eyes, Gunter, close your eyes.
Some of you may be aware that John Fitch is the only individual and the only American race driver ever to drive for the Mercedes factory team,
Even today.
ever to this day. That's a very interesting, singular distinction. This, of course, was John having a very pleasant conversation with his co-driver, Pierre LeVay, whose real name was Bouillon, but he used his uncle's name when he raced. And they were having a conversation before the race, and I believe they drew straws. LeVay got first ride. Unfortunately, we all know the consequences of that tragedy.
Let me comment on that tragedy slightly. There's been so much written about that tragedy that we need not dwell on it here, but a couple of comments as a race driver myself, and we've got a lot of race drivers in this room probably, but number one, Le Mans, and I have a photograph that's in the library in the 1954 Automobile magazine showing the straightaway and the pits with no guardrail, and the entrance to the pits is literally right off the longest straight as it makes a slight kink to the right. It was one of the most dangerous pit entrances of the day, if not ever. that accident was just waiting to happen. It was luck of the draw that Hawthorne cut in front of a Healy, or cut into the Healy, causing the Healy to go to the left, back onto the track, where another car, the Mercedes SLR, was coming at maybe 50 to 80 miles an hour, higher speed, and Hawthorne goes into the pits. The Mercedes of Livet is launched over the back of the Healy into the crowd, and we know the rest. Almost 160 people died within 6 months, 90 at the track, the rest from their burns. It changed racing for the next, since to this day, it has dramatically changed racing.
It also propelled John Fitch onto his life work of safety, both on the highway and on the racetracks. And it ended the racing career of Phil Walters, his very close friend, who walked away because his comment was, it could happen to race drivers. It should never happen to spectators. This, of course, is Phil on the left, Mr. C, or Briggs, whose real name was Briggs Swift Cunningham Jr. His son, who's about 85 now and who's a good friend of mine, is Briggs III, or nicknamed Briggsy. And of course, John on the right. This was taken as part of the filming of the movie The Racers, and of course, John is with a car on the left, and the other two drivers I can't identify. And Kirk Douglas starred in and this is the movie poster from that movie that John was a technical director of. Here's the Sterling Moss car that John drove at Monza in '55. Uh-oh.
What's that for?
I don't know, but we're unprotected. We're going to be in trouble. Help. I won't touch that comment.
Where'd that come from?
I don't know. Tourist trophy race in Ireland. And of course, it was Moss that damaged the 300 SLR, and the two drivers are concurring.
It's interesting to read back on all this history. And if you read the stuff from the 50s, it'll say Moss won the Truist Trophy. It doesn't say Moss Fitch. The press did not even view Fitch as being there. It doesn't say Moss and Fitch won the Targa La Flora. Came in fourth. Fitch rarely got his name in the press in those days.
Yeah. Also, another comment. Let's see. In the Sebring win, '53, where Phil Walters won in the C4, and Mike Hawthorne was his co-driver. The press all leaned on the Mike Hawthorne collection. They completely forgot Walters, who was running a faster lap time, I should add.
Yeah, the racing press, in fact, much of the racing establishment in the documentation of racing tended to leave Fitch off the page. It really did.
And here he is again with Mr. C and one of the Jaguar D-types. And Mr. Cunningham had a very good relationship with Jaguar. He couldn't make a deal with Enzo Ferrari. He tried, and he gave up. And he went to Jaguar, and he and Jaguar had a wonderful relationship to the point where he became a Jaguar dealer in New York City.
One little comment, because Larry wouldn't let me show a thing that was not on the slides, but there were two number 58s. This is the way the big boys do it. When they had actually two D-type Jaguars, and they both had the number 58, and so in the untoward event that one should fall out, you always have one to fall back on. That's all the way all the good racing teams do it.
That's how you could fix it overnight. You crash it on Thursday practice, and it's ready to go Friday morning.
No problem. John, among his many exploits, contacted the folks at General Motors and convinced them that they needed him to be the Corvette team manager. And that's the job that he got in 1956. John is driving the Corvette with the head fairing or fin, which is the middle car, and that's on the beach at Daytona. He managed to obtain a record, as you can see on the screen, in driving, I believe, he was definitely in the car on the left. The one on the right, I don't believe is the same because it had white wall tires and hubcaps. So,
Picture before. You see, it's the one the female driver. The lady is. No, it's Betty Skelton. No, they changed.
no, they're all black
ones.
tires,
Yeah,
black
you can't do
walls.
it from there, can you?
So, no,
I don't know.
we try to look at details.
Yeah.
It looks like the street car with the white walls.
Yeah.
They might have been a stickier compound.
That might be a PR picture too.
Could be. Here he is in a Jaguar D-Type, of course. And he enjoyed the speed weeks. Nassau was a good time for him. As you can see, he was first, second, and fourth in 3 different races driving Cunningham D-Types. And here's the car that looked much better than it ran.
Oh yeah.
It was a great-looking car. And this car is currently at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Museum. And it was a great Corvette. It just didn't run like a race car.
Let me make a couple comments. Bunky Knudsen first asked Zora to run the Sebring, and Zora said, "No, Bunky, I won't do it. We don't have a race car that can do anything there. I'm sorry, I won't be a loser." And so Bunky turned to Fitch. They knew each other, and he said, "John, would you like to be in charge of the team for 57?" John, knowing no fear, instantly said yes. Spent the next 4 months struggling to make the Corvettes work. Every part would break every time they went out. They finally got it together, and they won their class.
On this car, Fangio took this out in a practice session and set a track record at Sebring, but the car was not going to last. A friend of mine was in GM styling, and he said they were assembling the car literally inside the van on the way down to Florida. And when it got there, it was okay. It was very, very fast, but it didn't last because the rear suspension fell apart.
Yeah, it could have been a good car if General Motors had developed it, but as it stood there, it was not. But they did a good job. He brought in the dentist, Dr. Dick Thompson was invited to the team here. John put the team together, and it's amazing what they accomplished in 57 with a car that never should have been competitive.
Here,
According to Zora.
right. And that is, of course, Zora Duntov with John. Now we move on to the Lime Rock track that John helped to design, and he became the first track manager. Of course, he lived 1 mile from the track, so you could walk from his home on Salmon Kill Road over to the track. This is a current photo that I just received in an email that Lime Rock is sending out for promotional purposes. And when you look at it carefully, you'll see a second D-type. Mr. Cunningham, Briggs is in number 58, and that's his traditional helmet. And if you look carefully, you will see John Fitch in the second car right behind with his white helmet with the black top. With the blue top, and that's the number 59 car. Now we move on to Le Mans. Mr. Cunningham fielded 3 Corvettes, and it's interesting to note that when General Motors sent him the cars, and I believe, according to the bill of sale for number 2, the cost per car was about $2,800 to $2,900. And General Motors didn't charge for the 3 race engines that they sent because they wanted those installed by Fitch, Momo, Frick, whoever actually did that work for testing purposes. They tested them, ran them, brought the cars back to the States, took the engines out, shipped them back to General Motors, decommissioned the cars, painted them back the original street colors, took all the race equipment off, and sold them as slightly used Corvettes. And some of you may have heard the story recently, actually I can't believe it's 5 years now, where the number one car had been in a warehouse for approximately 35 years, and it was found. And it came to light through the VIN number that was on my BriggsCunningham.com website that was given to me 8 years before by Chip Miller before he passed away. He knew at the age of 52 he was dying of a rare blood disease. And he gave me the VIN number and asked if I would hold it until he was gone. I then posted it on the website, and it sat for 8 years. No hits. When the number one car was located in a warehouse that was being cleaned out in Tampa, Florida, the fellows doing the work Googled the number. There was only one place in the world that that number came up, my website. The first fellow said to his cousin, Google the number. Same thing. So they sent me photos of the VIN number and of this car in a dark photo, and I could tell by the corner of the windshield that it was a Corvette. But it didn't have dual headlights. It had one headlight. It was a brownish chocolate colored, cherry colored mongrel. But as soon as I saw 3535 in that VIN number, I knew exactly what it was, because Lance Miller and I are good friends, and he's Chip's son, and they'd been looking for the car. So I called Lance, and I asked where he was located, and he happened to be at Bloomington Gold. I asked if his good buddy, the Corvette restorer, Kevin McKay, was with him. He was. And I suggested to the two of them that they sit down and put their seatbelts on, because number one lives. And the two of them let out a scream. I almost didn't need the phone from Bloomington to Boston on that conversation. The upshot of that deal was that Lance Miller gave a blank check to Kevin McKay and said, get on a plane and go to Tampa, Florida and buy the car, which he did. And that was the beginning of the controversy over the title, and that's a whole other story, and you'll find that on my website. As some of you may know, John got involved with Corvairs. He didn't believe Ralph Nader's story about unsafe at any speed. He thought Mr. Nader had it all wrong. So he created the Fitch Sprint, among other cars. And we have examples here today in the parking lot. And that, of course, is the one-off Fitch Phoenix that he drove throughout his whole life. He loved it. Again, a Corvette, a Corvair, based car.
Comment on that. John told me the story that when they brought this out, I want to say it was one of the catalogs like Neiman Marcus or something. They put it, and they got deposits for over 500 cars, and that was just before the United States government came out with all the automotive standards. They passed a law shortly after he started this project that essentially said, we'll have the rules of this law in a couple of years. So John was sitting there with orders and no way to know what the legal requirements would be based on this new law, because they hadn't put the regs together, and it took 2 more years before they did. He had to return all the deposits. So the economic effort to build this car was totally upset by the federal government's law with no rules. That's the way things go, though. That's part of life.
This, of course, is a Porsche 904, and it was Mr. Cunningham's car, and both of them were together for their last official race in 1966, along with a third driver, Dave Johnson. We all have seen the barriers that are on the highway, and you can recognize the Fitch inertial barriers. Photo on the left was a series of these barriers at the entrance to the pit lane at Homestead International Racetrack. The photo is from the Miami Herald newspaper. I can't recall what year I picked that one up from, but I believe that is Scott Dixon's car. And what you don't see is the next photo when it broke in pieces, and it broke in half, and the engine went one way and the front went another, and he survived because of the barriers. Yep. You know, and John, being as underrated as he was, held between 14 and 15 U.S. patents. This is only one of them.
You know, I'm a mechanical engineer, and I spent a lot of time talking to John. He's not a graduate. He went to Lehigh, but never graduated. But he was a Mozart. He was a savant. He had a way of understanding things, dynamics, Newton's laws, all these things that was outside the textbook range. And he would say to me, you just have to give the human being 6 to 15 inches to slow down slowly to survive these crashes. You don't have to kill somebody if you give them a little bit of room to get slowed down from taking the G-forces from 30 or 40 or 50, which will kill you, down to the reasonable G-forces that you can walk away from. So John understood these things, and he was brilliant in his capacity to describe and define what he was going to do. He had to do all the testing on these barriers himself. He actually crashed cars into them with the press there and everything, using a Pontiac, and there's pictures of that. He knew what he was doing. He was very, very wise, insightful savant as an engineer, as a scientist.
It's estimated he saved over 20,000 lives with his barriers.
Oh, it's maybe more than that by now. It could be 1 million by now. But
Right, because they're used all over the world. And he explained one day that this cylinder, which comes in 2 pieces and is bolted together for shipping purposes, has 3 compartments. The top one has sand, the middle one has half sand, the bottom one is empty. And the point was that if it was fully filled with sand, you'd compress and create a launch. But by having the weight high, you'd hit it and the nose of the car would go down.
It's even better than that. If you'll notice, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. The first one has maybe 5% of the sand, the second one 10. The last one has 80 to 90% fill. So they were filled unevenly, and you could hit that at 30 to 50 miles an hour. You'd go right into it, you barely you wouldn't even crush your radiator. You could drive the car away.
It's basically separating one large crash into several smaller crashes. And just as Bob said, you know, the last one probably has 500, maybe 800 pounds. The first one has maybe 50 pounds, and that's the secret of it.
That was his brilliance.
These are wonderful group photos from the Formula Libre race that John created at Lime Rock to bring sports cars together with midget racers. And the sports car folks, including Ferrari drivers, Jaguars, and everybody else, was very surprised when Roger Ward won the race in a midget.
Yep. No transmission.
With no transmission, no gear shifting.
You don't need no transmission.
I love this photo. Unfortunately, all 3 of these wonderful people are no longer with us. Yeah. Phil Walters, Denise McLuggage, and our friend John Fitch. Wonderful smiles, just a great, great photo.
Yes, yes.
And this was taken here in '98 when both Fitch and Walters were here, and they're standing in front of a C4R continuation, one of 4 that were built. And that day I had the pleasure of being in a pace car. Phil Walters was behind the driver on the left side. John Fitch, because he was the tallest, was the passenger, and I was behind John Fitch. And that pace car driver gave all 3 of us quite a ride around the track. There's another group photo. All but 1 are gone. Everyone except for Bill Bradshaw, who is second from the right, are all gone. John Fitch, Bill Milliken, his buddy, Phil Walters, Denise, and Denver Cornett. And Denver, I believe, drove in the first Watkins Glen race, driving an MG.
he was the one who rolled his car, and a spectator said, "Oh, I wonder if anyone's dead." And he said, "Why don't you roll the car over and find out?"
Helps to have a sense of humor if you're going to be a race car driver. All right, now we're on to some of his inventions and patents. He created a displaceable race car track barrier, so you wouldn't hit the steel Armco that's up at the track at Watkins Glen. It was a plastic barrier that would move out controlled and come back without a slingshot effect.
This is a little like the practice sleds that they have in high school football. Those sleds move on the ground, and so they absorb the impact, and then the steel redirects the impact. So you went from a 25-degree impact to a 7-degree impact, you know.
Well, these were never built. John had a lot of very good ideas. This is one. Another was a seat that would allow the driver's whole torso and body in a capsule to move forward 6 to 8 inches as the crash happened on a momentum cable that essentially took and absorbed some of the G-forces. As the driver moved forward, it would allow him to decelerate slower than the car. These things were never built. He held the patents, but never got anybody to fund actually doing any of these things. He had one more idea, I don't think you've got it in here, and that was the idea of why the gravel areas off the racetrack on the outside of corners were terrible. Cars gravel plane at over 30 to 40 miles an hour. And they skid, the driver loses complete control. He advocated completely paving all the run-out areas at all the racetracks in the world so the driver would keep control, could stop 4 to 6 times faster, and some tracks have started to do that. But again, people, his voice was not heard. His voice didn't have the power of money behind it in many cases.
Yeah, that was the most successful of our efforts. I worked with John on this, and we had a press release called Pave the Gravel Traps. And actually, they were, SPA picked it up, Road America picked it up, Watkins Glen, well, here we are, Watkins Glen picked it up. So a few used it, but as Bob says, not enough. I want to say one little thing. It was kind of a humorous story. At one point, John sent out a list of to a list of people, all these details on these capsules and the barriers and everything, trying to get well-known people in motorsports to endorse these. Just as Bob says, may give them some importance, impact, etc. He sent out this material, and then between he and I, we were going to call everybody. And so I wound up with the name of John Cooper, the Cooper Car Company, the rear-engined cars innovator. And so I asked John if he would endorse this, and he said yes, he would. We got to talking a little bit, and just this and that and the other thing. And I said, oh, by the way, Mr. Cooper, I hope you don't mind, but we named our dog after you. And it's a retriever, and he's a very nice dog. And you know what John Cooper said? He said, don't give it a second thought, my dear boy. We love dogs around here. We have a dog at the shop. His name is Boxer, and sometimes we put him in one of the racing cars and take a picture of him. And I said, well, that's the funniest thing that I ever heard. We just took a picture of our dog in my old Formula Ford, and it came out very, very well.
On a more serious note, I'm driving with John Fitch, literally from Michigan, where he would fly in and I'd pick him up, and we'd go to Bonneville, and then we'd go out to Monterey. In fact, the year that he was the guest of Mercedes-Benz to be honored, I'm the guy that took him there. So we spent a lot of hours sitting in the car, and I'm pretty good at reaching out and getting him to talk. And I said to him, John, I would like to start a 401c3 charity to promote racing safety. I've been selling all my life. I own my own company and sold IBM equipment, et cetera. But anyway, I said, John, I can easily raise a lot of money. But in order to do so, I've got to have something that I can sell to the people with money, to go to the Penske's and the Mercedes people and the Chrysler and Ford and GM people and say, look, why don't you donate something to this and we'll make racing safer? And I says, you got to donate the patents only for the racing side, not the American road side, but racing only. And I'll make you president of the of this charity. You can be the guy in charge, and we can give you some money to pay the bills and buy groceries, which he's having trouble doing. He was 88, 89 at that time. He turned to me in the car and he went, what? What? These are worth millions of dollars. I'm not going to sell these I'm not going to donate these to anybody. And I went, okay, John, I can't raise a penny if you don't do it, but that's okay. He was a little stubborn. He was brilliant, but he had some flaws, but that's one of them. We don't talk about that very much.
Stubborn he was, and we loved him. This is the Fitch home in Connecticut, Lime Rock, Connecticut, and the Mercedes that Bob had made.
Now there's compression barrier again. Yeah,
A different compression barrier.
here we are.
Bob took him to Goodwood. I'm not sure who the lady is. Did you arrange that?
Yeah, that's Moss's wife, Susie, and my wife, Gail, behind her.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Then he couldn't get in trouble with those two women.
No. Going up the hill.
Yep. Beautiful photo. And was that windshield arranged because of his height?
Well, when John was in the Carrera in 52 with Mercedes, he got in the car and did some practice runs at high speed without that silly thing that's on the windshield there. And his helmet buffeted so much that he lost the visual acuity of his eyes and could not see where he was going. Your eyes vibrate, you're in trouble. So he took the car in that afternoon, told the mechanics, I can't see, you've got to give me a better windshield. And that showed up the next morning. So I had to build this car from photographs. So we literally, and I worked for Ford Styling for a while, and I have an industrial design minor, and I could deal with creating something from photographs. So that is as good a replica as we could make of knowing exactly where to place it, how high to make it, etc. And so that's why it's on the car, because John's head and torso were so long or so high above the windshield that he could not drive the car. Now, one comment about the accident in 52 that Larry talked about earlier. John was given permission on the third or fourth leg to return into the town after going about a mile because the front steering was so bad, it was almost uncontrollable and would have worn the tires within 25 miles. The officials there said, yes, you can do that. So he went back. They had so many blowouts. Mercedes had some issues with the tires they brought with them, and they were losing tires and they were blowing on, and apparently it had bent either the steering tie rod or something, and the car needed to be readjusted. They did it, got back on the track, finished that leg, came in fourth overall, if I'm not mistaken, and were disqualified at the end of the race. I think that put Phil Hill into that place because he was behind him. Yeah.
They basically reneged on their agreement.
Well, the agreement at the local stewards in that leg were overridden by the headquarter people that didn't agree with them. But that happens in racing, even today. Anyway, the bottom line is, if it hadn't been for that, Mercedes would have came in first, second, and fourth, and that would have been a little bit too much, I think, in 52 for the Mexicans even. So I think it was political. Just my opinion.
This is another Bob Sirna road trip with John Fitch. We went to Monterey with the same car. I apologize for the way the photo came out, but I just couldn't get it height and width to work in the PowerPoint.
That's all right.
And here we are back at the Glen. John was sitting in the C4R recreation car on Franklin Street. Dan Gurney was on the viewing stand, and I was standing with Sheila Walters, lady in the car, on the sidewalk in front of the courthouse. I'd gotten her a white wine, and we were having a nice chat. I turned to her and I said, Sheila, wouldn't you like to go for a ride with your old friend John? She said, sure. So we put her in the car, buckled her in, Then I went over to Dan, who was up on the reviewing stand, and I introduced myself, and I said, Dan, do you know who that lady is? No. Do you remember your boyhood idol, Ted Tappett, who was Phil Walters? Yes. That's his widow. The man comes down from the reviewing stand, forgot everything that was going on, went over and gave her a big hug and a kiss. And there's the photo.
One more little thing. Sheila Walters is one of the nicest all-time people ever. And one time, Fitch and I were coming back from a meeting on Long Island. I said, how long has it been since you've seen Phil Walters? We got a little time until the plane. Why don't we stop by? We went over there. Sheila made us all a bourbon and water. And Fitch and Walters, all they did is talk about their experiences in POW camps in World War II.
That was what was important, yeah.
They all had priorities. Here's the 50th anniversary of Sebring. John was invited as a guest of Mercedes. He called one day and he said, gee, my wife Elizabeth doesn't want to travel, want to take a ride. So I organized the trip. They took care of things. We flew to Orlando. There were two fellows holding a Mercedes star sign. We met them. They gave us the keys to a Mercedes E430 convertible. And they asked who the driver was going to be. And of course, I took the keys. I wasn't trusting John because he would have gotten a speeding ticket. And we had a great weekend, and it was outstanding. And this is the only photo, because I forgot to take a camera and take photos of him at that event. And I contacted Ken Breslauer, who is the historian for Sebring and has written the books about it. And he was nice enough to send me that photo. And of course, John was inducted in the Hall of Fame at that time. And we had a lot of fun. And he wanted to see his old friend Bob Tullius. And Tullius had a 20,000 square foot hangar at the Sebring track airport. So I drove John over, took photos of them with the P-51 Mustang, plane, and the race cars, and we had a wonderful time that afternoon. Here's another Bob. Sirna wants the mic. Routine.
Well, John had a good year in 2002. He really did. Hall of Fame, Sebring, Mille Miglia, and that's where we are here, and a few other things that same year. We got to Brescia, and John, the minute he would get near the car again, it was like he was 25 years younger. It just amazed me that this man who was in his late 80s was behaving like he was in his 60s. And it was a wonderful thing to ride with him. He did most of the driving. I think I only drove for 2 or 3 hours in the whole 3 days. He was driven to stay competitive. It was like it was in his blood. We got lost on the third day coming out of Rome trying to get back to Brescia. And it was night. It was terribly difficult to find our way in the Italian darkness. Finally, we hooked up with a Ferrari that was also lost, and they had a lead car that the three of us got back into Brescia. He pulled into a parking spot in front of a bar, jumped out and go in, and we would start drinking.
Here he is again. 2002, Mexico for Mercedes. He went to do photo shoots and PR work for them and came back, if I recall, very sick from that experience. This is a wonderful photo. Nice color contrast. Again in 2002, this was an event where Mercedes had invited him to come to the launch of the high-end Maybach or Maybach. And he asked if my wife and I wanted to go because his wife wasn't going. So we traveled with him again. And sitting at the table with Mercedes execs, Jay Leno was at the head table and he did a little monologue. And when he was finished, I made a beeline. That's the first time I had met Jay. And I introduced myself and I asked him if he knew John Fitch. And he said yes, that Fitch was one of his idols. And I got him to come over and say hello to John, and we took that photo. And then one of John's friends did the caricature, which depicts the two of them and their prominent chins. This was another Bob Sirna experience. Bob, as some of you may have heard, was bitten by the salt bug. It took him 15 years until 16, last year, to get the class record in Class E GT. F. Excuse me. Sorry for the typo. And it was an amazing experience. That year, I was there also. Somebody messed up the hotel reservations. I didn't have a room, so I slept on a mattress on the floor, and one of the two other guys in the room was Tim Considine, who you all may remember was one of my three sons and is a very good automotive writer. And it was an amazing experience to go to registration with John Fitch while he was registering as the oldest rookie driver in the history of the Salt Flats to get a license.
May I say one little comment? In what they call the rookie test, they said, "Well, Mr. Fitch, have you ever been at such a speed?" I think you're going for 107. He said, "Why, yes, I was driving quite a bit over that in the rain, in the dark at Le Mans."
Yeah, John made quite an impression at Bonneville. They weren't used to a guy like him, but they all got along pretty well. Chris Suizo came to Bonneville with a budget from a local Connecticut Mercedes dealer that they wanted to do a movie on John. So they did Going at Twilight. It came out real nice. You can still buy it. It's a video. You go on Google and Google Going at Twilight. You can buy the video. It's an excellent video. Sam Posey's in it. They interview Elizabeth, John's wife. We walk into the sunset. John and I, a little bit like in Casablanca, mumbling about how we got next year to try to get a record. It was a good time. I thought very, very brashly that I could take a Gullwing, and the record was only 9 miles an hour off my best time of 1:59 the year before, and I'd have no trouble hot rodding a Gullwing engine and making it go fast. And I thought it'd be great to have John in the driver's seat to do that versus me. Well, John and I did this for 2 or 3 years, and I could never get that Gullwing engine to make the kind of horsepower it needed. It was kind of like making a 5'11" person play pro basketball. You can't make an engine make horsepower if it can't breathe. And the Gullwing engine, as wonderful as it is, state of the art for the 50s, could not do what the 4-valve overhead cam modern or racing engine architecture can do that started with a Peugeot engine in 1911 and is still being used today in all the modern racing engines with 4 or more valves per cylinder. And I gave up and got my record last year using a Mercedes taxi cab sedan engine, the M104, that I had my buddy Jack Roush build for me. He's now my buddy because I've spent so much money with him.
A very close friend, I'm sure. This is another one of John's inventions, which is used today in trucking companies all over the world, naval ships all over the world. The catalyst comes in different sizes of ceramic pellets. The larger the engine, the larger the pellet, and it makes the fuel burn clean. From his inventions, John Fitch should have been a multi-gazillionaire. Unfortunately, he was taken advantage of by business partners because he wasn't a good businessman. But he was a great guy and a fascinating person. This is a picture of John with Augie Paps when they were at Elkhart Lake for the 60th.
Let me make a comment there. I got John to come to Elkhart Lake 60th. I found out what was going on, and his name was not on the list at all, only Phil Hill. They were going to dedicate the street course. And I talked to the guys doing it, and I says, "Why isn't John involved? Oh, is he still alive? Does he still exist? We didn't know he was even around." Well, we got him there, and I'll turn the mic back over to Larry.
And he did a great job. And he traveled, if I remember, to that event with Don Klein, who was his neighbor. Unfortunately, Don is no longer with us. He gave an outstanding eulogy at John's funeral in December of 12. And he had the entire church in hysterics as he mimicked the way John would speak. This was, of course, when Saratoga honored him in '06, and they did a huge fundraising. Some of the cars were there, including the number 3 Corvette that Lance Miller was gracious enough to send.
Notice that the 417 does not have a front bumper in this picture.
Aha, this is the real car, the picture of the real car.
Yes.
Very good, thanks, Bob. He was again honored in '07 in Detroit by the Motorsport Hall of Fame. Of course, he's been honored here in 2000 on the Walk of Fame.
In '07 at the Motorsports Hall of Fame, we were able to get the new owner. I had sold the 52 recreation of the Open W194 Carrera race car. The new owner graciously shipped it back to Michigan. We put it in my garage, cleaned it up, took it over to the theater where it was, put it up on stands, and it was on the stage, kind of where we're sitting, right along the stage when John was inaugurated into the Hall of Fame. It's kind of neat.
Actually inducted. All right, and this is from Peterson. And he was with a group of Corvette drivers who were inducted. I think there were 14 or 15, as I recall. And here we are at the 50th at Le Mans, where Lance Miller fulfilled his father's dream. His father, Chip, wanted to take the car, Bob Grossman and John Fitch back for the 50th. Unfortunately, Grossman was gone, Chip Miller was gone, and Lance followed his father's wishes, and he took John in the car back to France. And they had a wonderful time. And this is, of course, a poster from that event. And this video was made by Michael Brown from Texas of that event, the Quest. These are the halls of fame that John has been inducted into over the years. This is the birthday cake for his 95th birthday. We had about 100 people at his home and had a wonderful time. They got him up, they got him out of bed, and 2.5 months later, almost 3 months later, he had passed away. But it was a great day.
One little thing we haven't talked about that was not up here, but it's worth mentioning is he was also invited to Peterson Museum evening or dinner or week where they presented Carrera Pan American cars. I don't remember the exact date, but I still owned the 52 car at that time, so we shipped that out to California. It was on display in the Peterson Museum, prominently with the 51 Oldsmobile that won, or 50 Oldsmobile. The dates all run together. We had a great time there. One little story, John was being interviewed. We had to go out to lunch, and we had to walk around the corner about, a block and a half to grab a sandwich. When we got almost to the restaurant, to the place we were going to buy a sandwich, John was extremely winded. Now, I happen to have a wife who's got asthma, and I happen to have in my coat pocket just randomly one of her rescue inhalers. And I turned to John and said, John, here, use this. Oh, thank you, Bob. Thank you, Bob. I says, why don't you have one with, I leave that home. I don't need that. It's not important. And I'm looking at him. I'm saying, John, why don't you carry that? Oh, I don't need that.
He thought he was Superman.
Yeah. One more time. I'm talking to him a couple months later on the phone. I says, John, how you doing? He says, I'm doing pretty good. I says, health-wise, how you doing? He says, well, when I go out and mow the lawn, sometimes I get winded, but I'm better within about a half an hour.
You know, he's always doing that stuff. I mean, one time recently, I went up and he's up on the roof, prowling around on the roof of his house, you know. And there was one little story I wanted to tell about the Formula Ford doing it by eye.
But a little story.
It's a little story. Okay, I'm over at Lime Rock and I get in some oil. They didn't have an oil flag out. I have my Formula Ford and I bent a little bit of the hardware, I'm afraid. So I go over, I'm sitting there wondering what to do next, and Sirna comes by and says, why don't you take your car over to the place where they're building I don't know if I dare call it a replica Cunningham, but that's what it was. And it was at the Paradise Garage, and there was this guy there, the fabricator, and he said, geez, I was going to go to my parents' place in Maine, but I'll tell you what, if you have it here tomorrow morning by 8 o'clock, I'll do a little bit, and then I'll take off. He had everything done by 10 o'clock, and then wait, and then so I was fixing the car, trying to get it together, and wait a minute, this is the last of the story. Well, first of all, we took a picture, and he said, "Where did you put the picture, John?" I put it in the bathroom. Well, that's very funny, but anyway, and so. I tried to align the thing, and John was saying, no, you better change it. You better change it a little bit more. Okay, John, and change it a little bit more. Finally, it's perfect. So I take it to the aligner in Detroit a little later on, and by golly, John just does this only by eye. And I said, how'd the car go? Well, we had to readjust the right front, the left front, and the right rear. What about the other one? Oh, that was perfect. That was the John did by eye.
Yes. Excellent story, yes.
These cartons are the John Fitch archives, which are now the property of the Race Research Center. I boxed them, had them stored on the rear sun porch of his home, and the idea was that they were really going to go to Lime Rock. Skip Barber had said publicly that he was going to build a library, and he wanted to put all of the Fitch memorabilia in it. Of course, he never did. So Bill Green and I were at Lime Rock for the Vintage Festival, September of 13. We went to the house. I found the boxes were all where I left them. Nobody ever moved them out for storage.
Yep.
So we hauled them out of the back, put them in the living room next to the front door. My plan was to get a van and get them out. The next morning, we go back with two of Chip's people and a van, go to the front door. A young lady opens the door. She had tattoos. She's looking at me like I'm there to rob the place. And it turned out that she was a tenant that the Sons were renting to. And we hauled all these boxes, trophies, paperwork, archives out, put them in storage, and they sat for 3 years until I could get the three sons, his three sons, to sign the donation papers. That all happened last October. Bill Green and some of the other fellows from the Glen went to Lime Rock, picked it all up, hauled it back here, and Lime Rock forgot to send the goggles and helmet. And as soon as I found out about it, I went after the PR director, Rick Rosso, and made sure that the next day he shipped them by FedEx so that they could be reunited. No, you may not. You cannot have the mic. No, you have no, you cannot have. I need to control Mr. Carl. Now, if you're interested in more things about John Fitch, there is a Jay Leno YouTube video, a Michael Brown YouTube video, a Stephen Mitchell YouTube video. There are track stories about the 1955 Le Mans catastrophe. You can also go to John's website, which is racesafety.com. And I think we have hit on all the points. And I have, before we get to questions, which we'll do momentarily, I have two quotes. One of them that was recently given to me by Tim Considine from John Fitch, and it happens to be about myself. The quote is, Larry Berman has done more knows more about my racing history than I have forgotten. He's pulled up pictures of me in a lister somewhere, and I didn't recognize the background. I totally lost the memory on many of the events that he's cataloged, but he's got it all nailed down. It's a great racing history. In summary about our friend John Fitch, there were many drivers that were more well-known than he was, but he lived a very rich and exciting life, left an outstanding and enduring legacy, both in the world of motorsports and on the American landscape. And that's a quote from Kurt Ernst from Hemmings Motor News. We'd like to thank all of you for your time, your patience, and your forbearance with our speakers. Now we'll take some questions.
I want to close with one comment. Give me that. All right. No, you don't. Me. It's my turn. We're going to let Larry control us a little better. Anyway, I have one last quote from John. When he would make a presentation, and I was with him many times, he'd stand at the dais and he'd say, "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. I'm glad to be here. In fact, I'm glad to be anywhere at my age." And then secondly, he would say, "If I knew I was going to get this old, I would have taken better care of myself." So that ends our open for questions.
No more comments. And we have to be aware of the audience's time constraints, Mr. Carl Goodwin. Any questions for the panel? Gentlemen? On the left.
Stand up and tell us so we can hear you.
I had the pleasure of meeting John Fitch many years ago, and I know he was in trouble with the Connecticut DEC
I'll talk about
pollution on his property. Can you just quickly relate what happened?
All right.
What the outcome was?
All right, number one, you got to understand John's life. He was a World War II hero, a prisoner of war, and that generation, the greatest generation, according to Brokaw, literally felt that their government was one of the most important and supportive things in their life. So because of that, when John realized that he had a leaking fuel oil tank on his property, without even giving it a thought, his very first phone call was to the Connecticut EPA. And all heck broke loose after that. By the time he got involved farther, there was a pile of dirt 50 foot high on his front lawn that was contaminated. The tank had been removed, and now the rain was going to make that pile of dirt put whatever fuel oil contamination right into the watershed. Now, I have a letter in my file written to me by the Connecticut EPA, and it essentially says, "We know John's got a problem. We also know that there's thousands and thousands of other tanks in Connecticut that nobody's told us about. We are not going to do anything. John can live at his house. We'll deal with it when he passes." Now, what's happened since? I have no idea, but that's what they finally decided to do after the press and the racing community and everybody says, "You're going to take this 90-plus-year-old man, 80, 90-year-old man, and you're going to make the end of his life misery over him telling you this? Come on, guys." And they did back away, rightly so, and it was really kind of fair to say that they let him live the rest of his life in peace.
But they did aggravate him to a great extent. Any other questions? This gentleman in the middle.
What is it Carl wants to tell us?
Okay.
I never thought you would ask. Larry, I was just going to say, I think that we should all take off our hats to Larry Berman for everything that he's done on this. Give him a round of applause. Let's hear that applause. Let's hear it. Because, helping out motorsports history, that's what we're all here for. Thank you, Larry.
Thank you, Carl.
That wasn't that typical, was it, Larry?
No, it wasn't. Thank you very much for the compliments. It's actually a pleasure to have put this together to honor our friend John.
Any more? Is that it? Nobody else
That's
cares?
it.
Back there.
One more.
I just have a personal recollection, a couple of them.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want me to stand?
Yeah, please share it.
I was a soldier in Stuttgart, Germany, 1962. C-type Jag with him in the background. Ooh. And he sent it back to me, and the postage back then was kind of expensive, and I was a private in the Army and 3,000 miles from home. It has to have been one of the biggest days of my life. 50 years later, I happened to be organizing the reunion, the banquet, where I think some of you gentlemen might have been there, but it was John Fitch, Phil Walters, Brian Lister, and I forgot who else. And Denise was there, and my job was to put on the banquet. Well, we was right up at the track, and we had a power failure. And my head was about to explode. I had no idea what to do. And Fitch and Walters looked at me and just said, "It'll be okay, just relax." So those two little events, to me, gave me an insight to their depth of character, because they were very humble and very, very reassuring. So,
Comment along the same lines. Whenever John was approached by fans, he would stop whatever he was doing, pull out his Sharpie and start signing on. It would invigorate him. It would energize him. He loved to take the time to see the people. He was a gentleman's gentleman in that respect. He was just energized by anybody that wanted to give him that accolade or that attention. That was one of the most wonderful things about being around him. I remember being at Elkhart Lake when they dedicated the road course. Phil Hill and John Fitch were on the DS, and we went around, and he was sitting in the Jaguar, and kids came up to him. They had to drag him away from signing autographs. Phil was close to the end of his life, and he was suffering and was resting inside of a building, and he had great difficulty being out in public. So John carried the afternoon, and they did not even know he was around until I called and bawled him out and said, "Why isn't John coming to this? And why wasn't he invited?" "Oh, we didn't know he was alive." So that's part of the issues. More questions? Come on, we got to be more interest back there.
We'd like to thank you very much. One more.
Question?
Okay.
Other than the Sebring Corvette that you already commented on, what did John think of the other Corvettes at the time that he drove them? What did he think of them?
Well, General Motors was not really that capable or cognizant of what real race sports cars were in the mid-50s. Bunky Knudsen was literally dragging that corporation into the world of performance cars, and with John and Zora's help, but there were no other General Motors or Chevrolet cars that really had racing credibility or capability to speak of.
I'll comment that he made when they went to Le Mans with those Corvettes is that they were a kind of like a production version of a Cunningham. We think about it, front engine, big V8, a large car. The only thing they didn't have is brakes, and that was the problem. And eventually it was cured as well. But geez, John did so much for Corvette when they started at Sebring. It was like a car couldn't even make a single lap around the track without breaking something. And fortunately, John had the support of the GM management, so he would put every broken part on an airplane one night and expect it back the next day. And the engineers weren't happy about it, but they had to because they had the management pressure on. And they were great cars, and eventually evolved to what they are now, and everybody's happy with them.
In fact, one of the first things that happened is the wheels would break right around where they were welded. They couldn't hold up with the side forces. He got that fixed pretty quick, but it was part after part. But by the time the 9 or 10 weeks went by that they were down there, they had a car that lasted the race and won first in class. That's how hard it was. It was every day, 7 days, 24, something was breaking, and they were fixing it.
What would he say? We didn't get as much as we wanted, but we got more than we deserved.
Yeah, they did. They did. Now, that is a wonderful story, And John, we got another question there? Okay. Well,
I think so.
ask the question again. I didn't hear it.
Did any of his innovations in the Corvettes or the
Right. The question is, did any of the innovations that John had make it into the production cars? Absolutely. Once they finished Sebring, they understood back in the Corvette engineering world that they needed to have stronger, better parts. And the whole Corvette racing efforts that happened in and behind the factory doors and under the table through the 60s that involved the DiLorenzo, Owens Corning Corvettes, all the other Corvettes that followed, those people were giving them great parts out the back door, either through Bill Mitchell or Duntov or whoever. And the General Motors Corporation, knowing that what was going on, allowed the Corvette people to support the private racing world from 58 through the 70s very dramatically. The Grand Sports were supposed to be Duntov's greatest effort, and they would have been had the lawyers and the Corvette top management decided that sports car racing was not for them and the political climate that we had back then. So yes, he was a leader and he was a catalyst to what General Motors did after he was finished with Sebring.
Thank you again.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. I'm sure these three gentlemen are going to join us for the reception. So please, our administrative assistant, Samantha Baker, who is also our in-house caterer, has prepared some goodies for you. So please join us across the parking lot. Thank you once again.